The grand tribunal arena shook with fury. Tens of thousands of voices echoed through the colossal circular stadium, blending into a deafening roar that rattled the metal walls. Representatives from hundreds of worlds had gathered to witness a moment many believed was long overdue. An execution. At the center of the arena, beneath blinding white spotlights, knelt a fallen queen. Queen Zatha of the Zahirian Empire. Once, entire star systems had trembled at the mention of her name. Her fleets had conquered worlds. Her commands had shaped the fate of billions. Now she was nothing more than a prisoner. Her towering insect-like frame trembled with exhaustion. The magnificent crystal armor that naturally grew across her body was shattered and dulled, its once brilliant colors faded by injury and defeat. Deep cracks ran across the translucent plates covering her shoulders and chest. Heavy energy restraints locked her arms behind her back. Every movement triggered a flash of blue electricity. The crowd loved it. They screamed for punishment, for revenge, for death. Objects rained toward the arena floor from every direction. Bottles, metal scraps, protest banners. But the containment shields surrounding the prisoner vaporized everything before it could reach her. Zatha never looked up. She simply stared at the polished floor beneath her knees, silent, broken, alone. High above the arena sat the Galactic Tribunal, the most powerful court in known space. Their elevated platform overlooked the entire stadium like the judgment seat of gods. At its center sat Chief Arbiter Vorak, a massive gray-skinned being whose 6 eyes studied the prisoner without mercy. Beside him were delegates from the galaxy's most influential civilizations. The feathered Kavari clicked their sharp beaks impatiently, eager for a guilty verdict. The Stoneborn sat motionless, their rocky faces unreadable, though everyone knew they had demanded the harshest sentence possible. The Aquarians floated inside transparent water chambers, their bubbling voices broadcasting outrage through translation devices. Nearly every representative present wanted the same outcome: execution. Only one delegation seemed different. The humans. Their section occupied a relatively small corner of the tribunal platform. Earth had joined the Galactic Coalition only 5 years earlier. Most species still viewed humans as inexperienced newcomers who barely understood interstellar politics. Yet while the rest of the arena celebrated the Queen's downfall, the humans remained silent, watching, thinking, observing. Among them sat Dr. Elena Vasquez. Unlike the others, she wasn't focused on the tribunal proceedings. Her attention remained fixed on a handheld medical scanner. The device emitted a series of quiet beeps as streams of biological data scrolled across its display. Elena frowned. Something wasn't right. According to official reports, Queen Zatha was healthy enough to stand trial. But the scanner told a different story. Her heart rate was unstable. Multiple organ systems were shutting down. And beneath the obvious injuries, there was something else. Something hidden. Something that should not have been there. Elena looked up at the broken queen in the center of the arena, then back at the scanner. A chill ran through her. Because if the readings were accurate, Queen Zatha wasn't simply a prisoner awaiting judgment. She was dying, and nobody else seemed to realize it. What Elena saw confused her. The readings didn't match what everyone was saying about this creature. According to the charges, Queen Zatha was a monster. She had led her people in attacks on peaceful colonies. Her armies had destroyed 3 worlds completely, killing millions of innocent people. They called her the Destroyer Queen, the Blood Monarch, the enemy of peace. But Elena's scanner told a different story. The Queen's body was slowly dying. She was starving. Even though the prison should have been feeding her, her stress levels were so high that her organs were shutting down. Most strange of all, her brain showed patterns that Elena recognized from her years of studying alien minds. This wasn't the brain of a killer or a monster. This was the brain of someone suffering from terrible grief. Elena looked closer at the Queen. Really looked at her, not as a criminal, but as a living being. The Queen's 4 eyes were deep blue, almost purple. They stared at nothing, filled with pain so deep it seemed to have no bottom. Her breathing was slow and careful, like someone trying not to break down completely. The chief arbiter stood up. His voice boomed across the arena so loud that Elena felt it in her chest. "Queen Zathara, of the Zephyran Empire," he said, "you have been found guilty of war crimes against the Galactic Coalition. You destroyed 3 colony worlds. You killed millions of innocent people. You brought terror to peaceful systems across the galaxy." The crowd cheered. They loved hearing the charges read out loud again. It made them feel good to know that justice was coming for these crimes. The arbiter continued, "The sentence is death. You will be executed here before all the galaxy, so that others will know what happens to those who break our laws." More cheering. Elena felt sick listening to it. She looked at her scanner again. The Queen's heart rate had barely changed when she heard the death sentence. It was like she had already given up hope long ago. 2 guards walked toward the Queen. They were tall robots with glowing red eyes. One of them carried a ceremonial sword that sparkled with energy. This was how executions were done in the old tradition.
"Quick and clean,"
they said. Elena watched the Queen's face as the guards got closer. For just a moment, the Queen looked up. Her 4 eyes swept across the crowd, seeing all the species that wanted her dead. She saw the Kavari clicking their beaks happily. She saw the stone men sitting like mountains, unmovable in their desire for justice. She saw the Aquarians bubbling with satisfaction. Then her eyes found the human section. Elena saw something change in the Queen's expression. Not hope exactly, but curiosity. Humans were still new to most aliens. They were strange creatures who did things differently than everyone else. The Queen stared at them for a long moment, as if trying to understand something. Elena felt her heart beating faster. She had studied dozens of alien species, but she had never seen pain this deep in any living creature. Her scanner beeped again, showing new readings. The Queen's grief was so powerful that it was actually affecting her body chemistry. Elena had seen this kind of pattern before, but only in one situation. Mothers who had lost their children, the guards reached the Queen. One of them grabbed her by the shoulder and forced her to stand. She was tall, nearly 8 feet, but she moved like an old woman. Every step seemed to hurt. The crowd got louder, excited that the execution was about to begin. Elena looked at her fellow humans. Ambassador Williams sat with his hands folded, his face serious but not emotional. Captain Rodriguez watched the guards with the trained eye of a soldier. Dr. Chen, Elena's research partner, was taking notes on his tablet, probably studying alien justice systems. None of them seemed to see what Elena saw. None of them seemed to notice that something was very wrong with this whole situation. The guard with the sword raised it high. The energy blade hummed as it powered up. In a few seconds, Queen Zatha would be dead, and the galaxy would celebrate. Justice would be done. But Elena couldn't stop thinking about her scanner readings. She couldn't stop thinking about the grief in those 4 blue eyes. She couldn't stop thinking that maybe, just maybe, everyone in this arena was making a terrible mistake. Elena's heart pounded as she watched the sword rise higher. The crowd was getting louder and more excited. Everyone wanted to see the Queen die, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this was all wrong. Her scanner kept beeping, showing readings that didn't make sense if the Queen was really a monster. The guard holding the sword looked to the chief arbiter for the final signal. The arbiter raised his massive hand. In a few seconds he would bring it down, and Queen Zathara would be dead. Elena looked at the Queen's face one more time. Those 4 blue eyes were closed now, as if she was accepting her death. But Elena could see tears running down the alien's cheeks. They were clear, just like human tears, and they fell silently to the arena floor. That's when Elena knew she couldn't stay quiet. She stood up so fast that her chair fell backward with a crash. The sound was small compared to the crowd's roaring, but Ambassador Williams heard it. He looked at her with surprise and worry. "Wait!" Elena shouted as loud as she could. Her voice wasn't very strong. She was just one person in an arena filled with thousands, but something about the way she said it cut through the noise. Maybe it was because humans were still new to the galaxy, and people weren't used to hearing them speak up. Maybe it was because her voice sounded different from all the angry shouting. The crowd started to quiet down, confused. The guard with the sword stopped moving. Even the chief arbiter lowered his hand and looked around to see who had spoken. Elena's legs felt weak, but she forced herself to keep standing. "I said, wait," she called out again, louder this time. Now, everyone was looking at her. Thousands of alien eyes focused on the small human woman in the human section. Elena felt like she might throw up, but she couldn't stop now. Ambassador Williams grabbed her arm. "Dr. Vasquez, sit down," he whispered urgently. "You can't interfere with a tribunal decision." But Elena pulled her arm free. She had studied galactic law for years as part of her xenobiology training. She knew about rules that most people had forgotten. By Galactic Law Section 847.3, she announced in the loudest voice she could manage, "I invoke the right of species advocacy." The arena went completely silent. Even the chief arbiter looked shocked. Elena could hear her own breathing and the quiet hum of the arena's energy systems. It was so quiet that when the queen opened her 4 eyes and looked up at Elena, the sound seemed loud. Dr. Chen leaned over to Elena. "What's the right of species advocacy?" he whispered. Elena swallowed hard. "It's an old law. Any member species can demand a full review of all evidence before an execution. They have to stop everything and investigate again." Ambassador Williams looked pale. "Elena, that law hasn't been used in over 200 years. Are you sure about this?" Elena wasn't sure about anything, but her scanner was still beeping, still showing readings that proved something was wrong with this whole situation. "I'm sure," she said. The chief arbiter's 6 eyes were all focused on Elena. Now, when he spoke, his voice was cold and angry. "Human delegate, are you certain you wish to invoke this ancient law? Do you understand what it means?" Elena's mouth felt dry, but she nodded. "I understand. It means you have to review all the evidence again before you kill her. It means I have the right to investigate and present new findings to this tribunal. And do you understand," the arbiter continued, "that if your investigation finds the queen guilty as charged, you will share in her punishment?" Elena felt her stomach drop. She hadn't known about that part. If she was wrong, if the queen really was a monster, Elena would die too. The arena was so quiet she could hear her heart beating. She looked down at the queen again. Those 4 blue eyes were staring at her now, with an expression Elena couldn't quite understand. It wasn't hope exactly, but it wasn't despair either. It was like the queen was seeing something she hadn't expected. "I understand," Elena said, though her voice shook a little. The crowd exploded into noise. Some aliens were angry that the execution had been stopped. Others seemed confused about what was happening. A few were actually curious to see what the human would do. The Kavari representative stood up, his feathers ruffled with anger. "This is ridiculous," he screeched. "The evidence is clear. The queen destroyed 3 worlds. The law is the law," Elena called back, feeling a little braver. "And the law says, I have the right to investigate." The chief arbiter looked like he wanted to argue, but he couldn't. The right of species advocacy was written into the foundation of galactic law. It was one of the oldest rules they had, created back when the coalition was first formed. He couldn't ignore it, no matter how much he wanted to. "Very well," the arbiter said slowly. "The execution is postponed. Dr. Elena Vasquez of Earth has invoked the right of species advocacy. She will have 72 hours to conduct her investigation and present her findings to this tribunal." Elena felt relief and terror at the same time. She had bought the queen 3 more days of life, but now she had to prove that one of the galaxy's most hated criminals was innocent, and she had to do it in a way that would convince thousands of aliens who already wanted blood. Ambassador Williams stood up next to her. "With respect, Chief Arbiter, Dr. Vasquez will need access to all case files, witness testimonies, and the right to interview the accused." "Granted," the arbiter said, though he didn't sound happy about it. "But remember, human, if you fail to prove new evidence of innocence, both you and the queen will face execution together." Elena nodded, trying to look more confident than she felt. She started walking down the steps toward the arena floor. Behind her, she could hear other humans whispering urgently. Captain Rodriguez was probably planning security measures. Dr. Chen was likely already thinking about what kind of research they would need to do. But Elena only had eyes for the queen. As she got closer, she could see that the alien was even more damaged than she had thought. Her crystalline skin was cracked all over, like broken glass. Her forearms hung limply at her sides, held only by the energy chains. When Elena reached the energy barrier around the center of the arena, the queen looked at her with all 4 eyes. "Why?" the queen asked in a voice like wind through broken glass. "Why would you risk your life for someone you don't know?" Quote. Elena looked at her scanner one more time, then back at the queen's face. "Because my readings show me that you're not a monster. You're someone who lost everything and made terrible choices because of grief. And where I come from, we don't execute people for being heartbroken. For the first time since Elena had been watching, something that might have been hope flickered in the Queen's 4 blue eyes. Elena spent the first day reading everything she could find about the Zephyrian War. The case files were huge, filled with reports from military officers, colony survivors, and intelligence agents. Most of it painted the same picture. Queen Zatha was a ruthless leader who had attacked peaceful worlds without warning. But Elena was trained to look for things others missed. As a xenobiologist, she studied how different species thought and felt. She knew that human emotions weren't the same as alien emotions, but pain was something all living creatures shared. Dr. Chen helped her go through the files. They worked in a small room the tribunal had given them. Surrounded by holographic displays showing star maps and battle reports, Captain Rodriguez stood guard outside, making sure no one tried to stop their investigation. "Look at this," Elena said, pointing to a timeline on her screen. The attacks didn't start until 6 months after something else happened. The Zephyrian home system star started having problems. Chen leaned over to look. What kind of problems? Elena pulled up the astronomical data. Their sun was dying. Not slowly, like stars usually do, but fast. Something was causing it to burn out much quicker than normal. According to these readings, their whole system would have been frozen solid within 2 years. "That's not in any of the war reports," Chen said with a frown. "No, it's not. And look at this." Elena showed him another file. 6 months before the first attack, the Zephyrians sent a formal request to the Galactic Coalition, asking for help. They offered to share all their biotechnology in exchange for assistance relocating their people to new worlds. Chen read the document carefully. The Zephyrians had been desperate. Their message talked about millions of lives at stake and their willingness to do anything to save their people. It was signed by Queen Zathara herself. "What was the coalition's response?" Chen asked. Elena pulled up another document. Denied. They said the coalition couldn't interfere with natural stellar evolution. They also said there weren't enough resources to relocate an entire species. Chen sat back in his chair looking troubled. So they were just supposed to let their entire species die? That's what the coalition told them. Yes. Elena felt angry reading the cold official language of the rejection letter. It was written like the Zephyrians were asking for a small favor, not begging for the lives of everyone they had ever known. Elena decided to interview some of the witnesses. The tribunal had provided her with a list of colony survivors who had testified against the Queen. Most of them refused to talk to her, still too angry and hurt, but a few agreed to meet with her. The first was a stoneman named Boulder that stands firm. He had been a construction foreman on the 3rd colony world that was attacked. When Elena met him, she expected to hear about death and destruction. Instead, she got something very different. "The bug creatures came in the night," Boulder said in his slow, rocky voice. "But they didn't come shooting. They came with speakers." "Speakers?" Elena asked. "They broadcast a message to everyone on the planet. Said they were sorry, but they needed our resources to save their people. Said they would give everyone 12 hours to evacuate." Elena felt her heart race. Evacuate? That's not in the official reports. Elena felt her heart race. Boulder's stone face couldn't show emotion, but his voice got quieter. "No, I suppose it wouldn't be. Makes the story less clean, doesn't it? Hard to call someone a monster when they warn you before they attack." Elena asked more questions. According to Boulder, the Zephyrians had actually helped with the evacuation. They provided ships and even shared their emergency food supplies with the colonists. No one was killed in the attack itself. The destruction came later, when the Zephyrians stripped the colonies of all their resources and infrastructure. "Why didn't you tell the tribunal this?" Elena asked. Boulder was quiet for a long time. "Because 3 more colonies were attacked after mine. Because people were angry and scared. Because sometimes the truth gets lost when everyone wants someone to blame." Elena interviewed 3 more survivors. All of them told similar stories. The Zephyrians had given warnings. They had helped with evacuations. They had taken resources and buildings, but they hadn't deliberately killed civilians. It wasn't the story of innocent victims being slaughtered by monsters. It was the story of a desperate species stealing what they needed to survive while trying to hurt as few people as possible. On the second day, Elena finally got permission to interview Queen Zathara directly. The Queen was being held in a special cell deep under the arena. Elena had to go through several security checkpoints and walk down a long, dark hallway to reach her. The Queen sat on a simple metal bench, her forearms still chained. Up close, Elena could see how badly damaged she was. Her crystalline skin was more than just cracked. Pieces of it were actually missing, leaving raw patches underneath. She was much thinner than she should be. "You're dying," Elena said quietly. The Queen looked up with tired eyes. "Yes, my people's biology doesn't handle grief well. When we lose those we love, our bodies begin to shut down. It's how we're made." "Who did you lose?" The Queen was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Everyone. My children. My mate. My entire world. They're all gone now." Elena felt her throat tighten. The star collapse. "How many of your people died?" "Billions." The Queen's four eyes closed. "I saved maybe 10 million. The rest. They froze when our sun went out. I was their queen, and I failed them." "You didn't fail them," Elena said firmly. "You tried to get help through proper channels. The coalition failed you." The Queen looked at her strangely. "You really believe that, don't you? Even though your own species is part of the coalition now?" Elena nodded. "I believe in looking for truth even when it's uncomfortable." The Queen told Elena her story. How she had watched their son growing unstable and knew her people had maybe 2 years to live. How she had begged the coalition for help, offering everything her species had learned about biotechnology and genetics. How they had been turned away with polite words about non-inference policies. "I had a choice," the Queen said. "Watch my entire species die with dignity or become a monster to save who I could. I chose to be a monster, but you tried to minimize the harm," Elena pointed out. "The evacuations, the warnings, the shared supplies. A real monster wouldn't have bothered." "I told myself the same thing," the Queen replied. "But I still took homes away from millions of people. I still destroyed their lives to save mine. How is that not monstrous?" Elena didn't have an easy answer for that, but she was starting to understand something important about both humans and aliens. Sometimes there were no good choices, only necessary ones. On the morning of the third day, Elena made one more discovery. Hidden deep in the military files, she found communications between coalition commanders during the attacks. They had known about the Zephyrian evacuation warnings. They had known the attacks were focused on infrastructure, not people. They had known the whole truth, but they had decided to frame it as a genocide anyway. It was easier to paint the Zephyrians as monsters than to admit the coalition had let an entire species nearly go extinct. Elena stared at the files on her screen, feeling sick. The galaxy had been lied to. Everyone believed the Queen was a killer because it was a simpler story than the truth. It was easier to have a villain than to admit that sometimes good people were forced to do terrible things. She had found her proof. Now she had to convince a galaxy full of angry aliens to listen to a truth they didn't want to hear, and she had to do it in front of the same tribunal leaders who had helped create the lies in the first place. Elena stood in the center of the arena again, but this time she wasn't afraid. She was angry. In her hands, she held a datapad containing all the evidence she had found. Around her, the same thousands of aliens who had wanted blood 3 days ago waited to hear what she had discovered. The chief arbiter looked down at her with his 6 eyes, clearly hoping she had failed. "Dr. Vasquez, you have had 72 hours to investigate. Present your findings to this tribunal." Elena activated the holographic displays around the arena. Star charts appeared in the air above everyone's heads, showing the Zephyrian home system and its dying sun. Then came the timeline of events, the evacuation records, and the communication files she had uncovered. 3 years ago, Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the arena's speakers. The Zephyrian star began collapsing unexpectedly. Their entire system would have been frozen within 2 years. Queen Zathara sent desperate requests to this very coalition, begging for help to relocate her people. Murmurs started in the crowd. Some aliens were seeing this information for the first time. Elena showed them the coalition's rejection letter. The request was denied. 10 billion Zephyrians were left to die because helping them was considered too expensive and too complicated. The Kavari representative stood up, his feathers ruffled. "This doesn't excuse their attacks on innocent colonies." "No, it doesn't," Elena agreed. "But it explains them. And the attacks weren't what you were told they were." She showed the evacuation records, the witness testimonies, the proof that the Zephyrians had warned each colony before taking their resources. She showed them the communication files, proving that coalition military leaders had known the truth all along. The Queen didn't order the deaths of millions, Elena concluded. She saved the few million she could, while trying to hurt as few others as possible. The coalition chose to frame her as a monster, rather than admit their own failure to help. The arena was quieter now. Some aliens looked confused. Others looked angry, but Elena couldn't tell if they were angry at the Queen or at being lied to. A few seemed to be actually thinking about what she had said. The chief arbiter studied the evidence for several minutes. Finally, he spoke. Dr. Vasquez, your investigation has been thorough. You have presented evidence that the situation was more complex than originally reported. Elena felt hope rising in her chest. However, the arbiter continued, complexity does not equal innocence. The Queen still ordered attacks on civilian colonies. She still caused massive destruction and displaced millions of people. Whether her motives were desperate or evil, the result was the same. The sentence stands. Elena felt like she had been punched in the stomach, but the evidence shows. The evidence shows that Queen Zotha had reasons for her crimes. The arbiter interrupted. It does not prove she didn't commit them. Justice must be served. The crowd was getting louder again. Most aliens seemed satisfied with the orbiter's decision. Elena looked around desperately, trying to find any support for the Queen. The human section was the only place where people looked genuinely upset by the ruling. Elena's mind raced. She had proven the Queen wasn't a monster. But the tribunal didn't care. They wanted someone to punish, and the truth was just an inconvenience. There had to be something else she could do, some other law she could invoke. Then she remembered something from her legal studies. Another old law, even older than the right of species advocacy. It was something that hadn't been used in centuries, because most species thought it was insane. Then I invoke the right of substitution, Elena announced. The arena went dead silent again. Even the arbiter looked shocked. Dr. Vasquez, are you certain you understand what that means? Elena's heart pounded, but her voice was steady. I understand perfectly. I offer to take Queen Jathara's place in exile. Let me serve her punishment instead. Gasps echoed through the arena. The right of substitution was an ancient law that allowed someone to voluntarily take another person's punishment. It required the accused to accept the offer willingly, and both people would share whatever punishment was decided. Ambassador Williams jumped to his feet in the human section. Elena, no, you can't do this. But Elena ignored him. She was looking at Queen Zotha, who had been brought up from her cell to hear the verdict. The Queen's 4 eyes were wide with shock, and something that might have been hope. Why? The Queen asked, just like she had 3 days ago. Why would you do this? Why? Because punishing you won't bring back the people who died when your star collapsed, Elena said. And it won't help the people you displaced find new homes. But maybe working together, we can prevent this from happening to someone else. Dr. Chen stood up in the human section. Elena turned to look at him in surprise. If Elena is going into exile, he said loudly, then I'm going with her. Ambassador Williams stared at his colleague. Marcus, sit down. This is insane. But Chen shook his head. Elena is right. The Queen made terrible choices, but they were choices forced on her by desperation. If we're going to punish her for trying to save her people, then we're no better than the leaders who let those people die in the first place. Captain Rodriguez stood up next. I've seen what happens when good people are forced to make impossible choices. Sometimes there are no right answers, only necessary ones. If Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Chen are taking this stand, then I stand with them. Elena felt tears in her eyes as more humans began standing. Not all of them, but enough. Ambassador Williams looked around at his people, clearly torn between his duty and his conscience. This is madness, the Kavari representative screeched. You can't all share in a war criminal's punishment. She's not a war criminal, Elena called back. She's a mother who watched her children die and tried to save who she could. In my species, we don't execute people for that. Young voices started speaking up from other sections of the arena. A few stonemen stood, their rocky faces impossible to read, but their actions clear. Some of the younger Aquarians made bubbling sounds of agreement. Even a handful of Kavari, mostly the younger ones, stood with their feathers smoothed down in respect rather than ruffled in anger. The chief arbiter looked around the arena with growing alarm. This wasn't how galactic justice was supposed to work. People were supposed to accept the tribunal's decisions, not stand up and offer to share in punishments. This is highly irregular, he said, his voice booming. The right of substitution is not meant to be used by groups. The law doesn't say it can't be, Elena pointed out. It just says someone can offer to share in another's punishment if the accused accepts willingly. All eyes turned to Queen Gathara. She looked around the arena at all the beings who were standing for her. Humans mostly, but others too. Aliens from different species who had listened to Elena's evidence and decided that sometimes the truth mattered more than simple justice. The queen was crying again, those clear tears running down her damaged face. "I accept," she said quietly, then louder so everyone could hear. "I accept your offer, Dr. Elena Vasquez of Earth." The crowd exploded into noise. Some aliens were furious that the execution was being delayed again. Others seemed confused by this strange human behavior, but Elena noticed that more and more young aliens were standing up, inspired by something they had never seen before. Ambassador Williams finally stood up too. "If my people are determined to do this," he said with a sigh, "then they won't do it alone. Earth stands with Dr. Vasquez and Queen Zathara." Elena looked at the Arbiter, who seemed completely lost. The ancient laws were clear, but this situation had never happened before. How do you punish someone when hundreds of people volunteer to share their fate? "This is impossible," the Arbiter muttered. "We cannot exile half the arena." "Then maybe," Elena suggested, "it's time to consider a different kind of justice. Not punishment, but restoration. Not execution, but redemption." The Queen looked at Elena with something Elena had never seen in those four blue eyes before. Real hope. And around the arena, for the first time in the galaxy's history, aliens were seeing something that would change how they thought about justice forever. They were seeing the human way. The arena had never been so quiet. Chief Arbiter stared at the hundreds of beings standing in solidarity with Queen Zathara, and for the first time in his long career, he didn't know what to do. The ancient laws were clear about individual substitution, but nothing had prepared the galaxy for this kind of collective compassion. Queen Zatha looked around at all the faces turned toward her. Humans, yes, but also young aliens from dozens of species. Beings who had listened to Elena's evidence and chosen to believe that sometimes even terrible actions could come from desperate love. Slowly, the queen rose to her full height. Even damaged and chained, she was impressive. Her forearms strained against the energy bonds as she tried to stand with dignity. "I have something to say," she announced, her voice carrying across the silent arena. The Orbiter nodded reluctantly. "Speak." The queen looked directly at Elena, then at all the humans standing for her. "Dr. Vasquez, you have shown me something I thought was lost forever. You have shown me that there are beings in this galaxy who can see past actions to intentions, past crimes to causes." She paused, gathering strength. "But I cannot allow you to share my fate. What I did was necessary, but it was still wrong. I took homes from millions to save millions of my own people. I caused suffering to prevent suffering. The math was sound, but the pain was real." Elena started to object, but the queen held up one chained hand. "Therefore," the queen continued, "I formally surrender my crown and my title. I am no longer Queen Zatha of the Zephyrian Empire. I am simply Thor, a person who made terrible choices and must live with them." The arena erupted in surprised voices. No one had expected this. "Furthermore," Thera said, raising her voice above the noise, "I request that my sentence be changed from execution to service. Let me spend the rest of my life working to repair the damage I have caused. Let me use my knowledge to prevent other species from facing the same impossible choice that destroyed my people." The Chief Arbiter looked stunned. "You surrender your royal status." "I do. A true queen protects her people. I failed in that duty when I let billions die. I don't deserve the crown. I do 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 deserve the crown." Elena felt her heart breaking for this brave, broken woman, but she also felt something else. Hope. Real, genuine hope that something good might come from all this tragedy. The Arbiter conferred quickly with the other tribunal members. Elena couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see heated discussions. Some members wanted to stick with the original execution. Others seemed intrigued by this unexpected turn. Finally, the Arbiter turned back to the arena. This tribunal has never faced such a situation. An accused criminal voluntarily surrendering royal status and requesting rehabilitative service instead of execution. He paused, looking around at all the standing figures. However, the support shown here today has been remarkable. The evidence presented by Dr. Vasquez has shown that this case is more complex than originally thought. Elena held her breath. Therefore, the arbiter announced, we hereby commute the sentence from execution to supervised rehabilitation. The former queen will work under coalition supervision to develop solutions for stellar collapse and refugee relocation. Her work will be monitored by representatives from multiple species, including the human delegation. The arena exploded into noise again. Some aliens cheered. Others booed, but Elena noticed that more voices were cheering than booing. The standing demonstration had affected more people than she had realized. 6 months later, Elena stood in a completely different kind of room. Instead of the cold arena, she was in a warm laboratory, filled with growing plants and humming computers. Charts covered the walls showing stellar data and refugee placement statistics. Thera worked at a computer terminal, her crystalline skin much healthier now that she was eating properly and had found purpose again. She was smaller than Elena remembered. Maybe because she no longer carried the weight of a crown or the burden of royal failure. The Altarian system, Thor was saying, pointing to a star chart. Their star is showing the same instability patterns mine did 3 years ago. If we act now, we can extend its life by millions of years. Elena nodded, making notes on her tablet. How many people live there? About 50 million. Not as many as we lost, but Thor's voice caught slightly. Even after all this time, the pain was still there. Every life we save matters, Elena said gently. Your people would be proud of this work. They had become friends over the months, something Elena never would have expected. Thor was brilliant, kind, and haunted by her choices. But she was also determined to make sure no other species faced the same impossible situation her people had. Dr. Chen entered the lab carrying coffee for Elena and a special nutrient drink for Thera. The Altarian government just approved our intervention. He announced, we start next week. It would be their 5th successful stellar stabilization. The Zafirian biotechnology, combined with human engineering and coalition resources, had created something remarkable. They weren't just saving stars, they were saving entire civilizations. There's more news, Chen added. The Council of Young Species wants to meet with us. They're proposing something they're calling the Human Doctrine. Elena raised an eyebrow. What's that? Apparently, it's the idea that justice should focus on prevention and restoration rather than punishment and revenge. They want to make it official policy. They looked up from her computer, her 4 eyes bright with something Elena had learned to recognize as happiness. Your species is changing the galaxy, Elena, making it more compassionate. Elena thought about that as she watched Thera return to her work. The former queen had lost everything, her crown, her people, her world. But instead of being consumed by bitterness, she had chosen to use her pain to help others. That evening, Elena walked through the coalition headquarters and saw things that would have been impossible a year ago. Young aliens from different species working together on refugee projects, support groups for survivors of stellar collapse, research teams studying early warning systems for cosmic disasters. The humans hadn't just saved one alien queen. They had introduced an idea that was spreading through the galaxy like ripples in a pond. The idea that even enemies could be understood. That even criminals might be driven by love rather than hate. That even the worst situations might have solutions if people were willing to look past their anger to find them. Elena's communication device beeped. It was a message from Ambassador Williams, now head of the new Department of Intercation. Elena, his recorded message said, I wanted you to know, the Zafaran survivors have just established their first new colony. They're calling it New Hope. They asked me to tell you that they named their capital city Vasquez. Elena felt tears in her eyes. Through the laboratory windows, she could see the stars. Somewhere out there, 10 million Zephyrians were building new lives on a new world. Somewhere else, 50 million Altarians were going to bed tonight, not knowing that their star would still be burning for millions of years longer, because of work being done in this very building. Thera appeared beside her at the window. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking about choices, Elena said. How one person's choice to stand up in an arena can change everything. Thera nodded slowly. In my species, we have a saying, the heart that breaks for others grows large enough to hold the galaxy. I think humans understood this long before the rest of us did. Elena smiled. Maybe. Or maybe we just got lucky that day. No, Thera said firmly. Not lucky. Brave and kind, and willing to see past what everyone expected to see. She paused, looking out at the stars. My people are still gone. That will never change. But because of you, other people's children will grow up under stable stars. Other mothers will never have to make the choice I made. Elena put her hand on her friend's arm. That's what justice should be, isn't it? Not punishment for the past, but protection for the future. Thera smiled, an expression that looked strange on her alien features, but somehow perfectly natural. The humans are teaching us well. As Elena looked out at the stars, she thought about the young aliens throughout the galaxy, who were growing up with new ideas about justice and compassion. They would be the leaders of tomorrow, and they would remember that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand up when everyone else wants to sit down. The galaxy was changing, not because of laws or treaties or military force, but because one day, a human woman had looked at a broken alien queen and seen not a monster, but a mother who had lost everything. And sometimes, Elena realized, that's all it takes to change the universe. One person willing to see what others miss. One voice willing to speak when others stay silent. One heart willing to break for a stranger. The human way was spreading to the stars. One act of compassion at a